Peace begins with me. Peace is my responsibility. Peace is your responsibility. Peace is innate within every human being. Today, my talk is based on two of our unity principles, two of our 5 unity principles. The first one is the third unity principle. We are co-creators with God, creating our world through our thoughts, words, and actions. And the second unity principle that this is based on is the 5th principle that states, through thoughts, words, and actions, I live the truth I know. Through thoughts, words, and actions, I live the truth I know. And Charles Fillmore said, the truth we live is the truth we know. All else is conjecture. We may be acquainted with the truth. We may have heard a teaching. We may even verbalize that teaching. But until we know that truth, that teaching within ourselves, until we know that truth, it generally is not outpictured in our lives. We live the truth we really, really know. Nelson Mandela, because he stood up for equality and for the ending of poverty, for the equality of all people, regardless, was imprisoned. He was in prison for 27 years. Imagine that. More than a quarter of most people's lifetime. It was more than a quarter of his lifetime. Imprisoned 27 years. 18 of those years, he was imprisoned on an island where he went into a quarry every day with his fellow prisoners to break up rocks to make gravel. 18 years, every single day. Think about it. If anybody had reason, circumstantial reason to be resentful and full of hate, wouldn't it be him? He was wrongfully imprisoned. I understand it was a mockery of a trial, and was kept there for 27 years, 18 years in hard labor. He would have had, and justifiably so from a reasonable standpoint, every reason to hate and be bitter. And yet, when he walked out of the prison because of international force, if you will, he was released from prison. And shortly after he was released from prison, he became the president of South Africa, furthering his work. I want to read you a couple of quotations from him. If you really want to feel lifted up, I would say just Google quotations from Nelson Mandela. There is a site where there is a whole list. Do not look the other way. Do not hesitate. Recognize that the world is hungry for action, not words. Act with courage and vision. Now remember, I said to you, the talk today is based on two of our unity principles. The 5th principle says, it is not enough to know the truth. We must live the truth that we know. Second quotation, as long as poverty, injustice, and and gross inequity exist in our world, none of us can be truly free to rest. What affects one affects us all. It's a basic unity teaching, and in many other world religions, that we are one, that we are all connected. We are connected with each other. We may not always agree. I don't think that we were put here to constantly agree. If that was true, why do we each have different fingerprints? I think that's one of God's reminders, saying, you may be similar, but you're not exactly like anyone. We are not put here to act alike, look alike, have the same opinions, but we are put here to know that we are connected and to know how to love each other. And in our heart of hearts, in our mind of minds, we do know how to treat each other and how to love each other. Many times, probably most of the time, we come into this world in original innocence. And here's an aside. I found out this past week, when we were having Season of Peace, when we had Dr. Kara come in and speak to us about Islam. One of the Islamic teachings is that we are born in original innocence, which is one of the teachings of unity. We are born in original innocence. But once we are born, things begin to superimpose over that original innocence. And after a while, we forget who we really are. We forget that we are made in the image and likeness of God, that we have characteristics of God. We have access to those characteristics. And so we act accordingly. We start to take on the characteristics and the teachings and the belief systems of those around us, especially those people whom we trust and we love. And people that love us and loved us as children probably taught us the best that they knew how to teach. If they knew any better than that, they would have taught us better. I don't think there is no even close to mentally healthy parent that takes their newborn child and looks at their child and says, I believe I will ruin your life as much as I possibly can. Of course not. We each were raised by parents who were doing the best they knew how to do. If they knew better, they would have done better. And so, in this world, things get superimposed over. And today what we're talking about is peace and how we are each responsible for peace in this world. You've probably all heard the story, analogy, whatever you might want to call it, that peace within me goes out into my family and causes peace to be in my family and my friends. And from that, peace goes out into the community. It goes out into the city. It goes out into the state, the country, then the world. And that is how we are each responsible for peace. We just completed the season of peace, where since 2008, we come together, groups of us come together, and just for a couple of weeks, we focus on peace and ways that we can move peace, help to move peace into our world. And it starts with personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. We may not be able to see immediately how a kind word to another person can cause world peace. But that indeed is the only way it will be caused. I've had some opposition on this, and frankly, I don't care. But I believe peace is possible in my lifetime. As a matter of fact, the official statement for peace, official unity statement for peace, after 9/11 happened, world leaders and leaders of world religions were asked to make a statement, an official statement. And so our statement was put together by Reverend Gary Simmons. Some of you know him. He is a very well-respected minister within the Unity movement. And he, at that time, was head of our peacekeeping department. How would you like that title? Head of the peacekeeping department. While all of that was still going on, I took a class that he had put together. Have my certificate and everything on my wall in my office. I graduated and got certified in peacekeeping skills. And here's the thing. None of that really makes any difference until I have peace and can touch that peace within myself. It's true of all of us. This is where it starts. I'm not downgrading anything that we do in order to put the focus on peace. But it is possible to go out in the world and do lots of things in the name of peace and probably do lots of good. But to me, the most good is done when we sit alone in a room with our own selves and feel and know the peace that we are. There is a part of us, and I like to quote this. It's an Eastern quotation. There is a part within me that water cannot wet, wind cannot dry, fire cannot burn, and weapons cannot destroy. And part of that is peace, indelibly connected with love. Our job in this world is to release those things that have superimposed themselves over that knowledge of peace and love. So, as usual, the teacher in me wants to give you some concrete stuff. Some practical steps to bring peace to the foreground. And one of these things is something that I learned, I was acquainted with and learning years ago, many years ago. Some of you know that I'll just shorten it to say that the beginning of my life was pretty rough. Okay, just leave it at that for today. And there was a point at which I was clinically depressed and suicidal. This was many years ago. It seemed, and honestly, it seems to me now like a movie that I saw once, because I'm so far removed from that life and that person. But I was seeing a therapist, and being deeply depressed, she was helping me just to get stabilized enough to even want to live. And she said, as best you can, remove yourself from any negativity. Whatever impacts you in a negative way, remove yourself from it as best you can. The only exception to that would be if removing yourself from it is harder on you than staying in it, such as a family member that constant negativity was the order of the day. And it appeared to me as though that was all this person knew to talk about. She said to me, if it's harder to extricate yourself from that person than to stay in it and deal with what comes up, what comes out of her mouth, deal with it in your own mind. Then make a choice about that. So as best you can, I'm going to say, remove yourself from negativity. And that does not mean pretend that things do not exist. Do not look the other way, Nelson Mandela. Do not hesitate. Recognize that the world is hungry for action. So we don't compartmentalize and pretend that everything is rainbows and we're tiptoeing through the tulips. Yes, there will be parts of life that feel like that, but let's not pretend that poverty doesn't exist. Don't pretend that people go to bed hungry every single day on our earth. Don't pretend that there are injustices and inequality, but we don't give it the bulk of our thought. What we focus on expands. That is a basic teaching in unity. Basic teaching, that's the third unity principle. Through our thoughts, words, and actions, we co-create the world. We co-create the world. So we give these things, this inequity and hunger and poverty and that type of thing, we give it the attention that it needs, and we give the bulk of our attention to what is working. I've heard it said by people, one was Edwin Gaines, and I've heard and read it since, that there is no shortage of food on the earth. There is no shortage of food. It's the distribution that is the problem. So constantly, I invite you to hold in your prayers that we learn better ways of food distribution, because food is a basic fundamental. Without it, we can't move into the higher consciousness. So, the second thing is, make the most of all that comes and the least of all that goes. This was from my maternal grandmother, and I've heard it since then as well. And she was a perfect example of that. I mean, it was great when she told me the words, but I could see it in her life. She would, there would be things that would happen in her life that were hard to manage, and difficulties came. I never know how to explain this in a few words, because I want to say next door, but we lived out in the country where next door was like, I don't know, a quarter of a mile. So that's how I lived with my grandmother, running back and forth, and yes, literally running. Everywhere I went as a kid, I ran. But I would spend almost as much time at her house as I did my own. And this is what I saw in my grandmother. She didn't pretend that adversity doesn't exist and didn't exist in her life. She did not pretend that. She would face it, do whatever she could do about it, and then, as a phrase from the Bible says, shake the dust from her feet and move on. The most difficult thing that I ever saw my grandmother go through was the death of my mother. My mom passed when she was 60. My grandmother lived to 97. We don't, as parents, and even if you don't have children, we generally tend to think of people younger than us, that we will go first in the order that we were born. And it's not logical, but somewhere in my mind I thought like that. I watched my grandmother deal with that. She still, after a few days, she got up. She was a farm woman and she loved that life. She got up, she fed her chickens, she hoed in the garden. She did spend a lot of time indoors, and I'm sure grieving the way that she needed to grieve. But this did not stop her. She was making the most of all that came and the least of all that went. The most of all that came was still her garden, her chickens, and that type of thing. And this one is extremely, extremely important. Do whatever it takes to hear that still small voice in your life, whatever it takes. For some of us, we like to sit in meditation. For some people, it's a walk. For some people, it's doing crafts and being silent and quiet and solitary. Whatever it is, figure out what it is for you, and do not neglect spending time in that still small voice, listening. It is my belief and it's my experience that God speaks to me through people, God speaks to me through things I read, through billboards, through lots of things, but nothing can substitute for sitting in quiet and stillness, listening for the still small voice. And one of the things that we looked at is honoring diversity. This can bring not only peace to our own selves, but peace to other people, therefore peace out into our cities, countries, and the world. Honoring diversity. Now, this doesn't mean that we're trying to pull everybody together and homogenize it all, and everybody pops out looking, thinking, acting, speaking the same. Of course not. It's coming together like we've done in Season of Peace. Listening to other people. Listening to other people talk about what is important to them. Listening to other people talk about their particular faith tradition. As we listen to these people during the Season of Peace, those of you that were there can help me. In the beginning, we had a speaker from the Baha'i faith. We had a speaker from Buddhism, Islam, the Quaker faith. Help me. What else do we have?
Hebrew, Jewish.
Yes. We went to a Jewish Shabbat service at the temple here in San Angelo. And as we go through these things and listen to people speak about their own faith tradition, similarities start to pop up. Each of these faith traditions have a way of praying. Each of these faith traditions talked about one God. Each of these faith traditions talked about love your neighbor as yourself. Does that sound familiar? There are so many common threads. The cultures may be different, the ways we go about things may be different, but there are common threads in there. So, honor diversity. Peace is my responsibility. Peace is your responsibility. And here's some good news. We are powerful beyond measure. Jesus said that we could do the same things that he did, and even greater things can we do. We are powerful. Yes, peace is our responsibility. I have goosebumps. This is another way that God says, right on. It is our responsibility, and the good news is we are powerful beyond measure. What we think, how we speak, how we act in the world has an impact on whether or not we have peace. Gone are the days when we could say, in good conscience, those people out there need to do something. Why don't they do something? Why doesn't the government do something? Why doesn't this group do something? Why don't they straighten up and act right? Peace begins with each one of us. So I want to end with this scripture, Philippians 4:6. Some of you will recognize. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, in prayer and thanksgiving, let your mind be known to God. And the peace that passes all understanding will guard your heart and your mind. I don't think there's a way to misinterpret that. It's pretty solid. I really like the New Living Translation because it is like we speak today, and this is the New Living Translation. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank God for the blessings that are already in your life. If you do this, you will experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than the human mind can understand. Condensing it and putting it in a nutshell. Stop worrying. Make your requests known to God through whatever prayer, however you pray. And open your heart and mind to peace, allowing everything unlike peace to fall away. The more often we do that, the more habitual it becomes. The more it becomes the norm. The peace that passes understanding will guard your heart and your mind. Peace begins with me.